Okay, let's see. We're at 10:03, so I think we'll get started. Um, so welcome. We are so thrilled to have you here with us to talk about some of our programs, but also have a lesson on intercultural interactions and intercultural negotiations. So we're here from the University of Pennsylvania English Language Programs, and we welcome you to joining us today. It's the morning here in Philadelphia, but wherever you are, if it's afternoon or later in the day, welcome. We thank you for taking the time to join us. And very briefly, I'd like to introduce myself and my colleague, Danielle. So my name is Sarah Arva Grosik. I am the Director of Programs for the ELP. And Danielle?
Hi, I'm Danielle Bergez, and I work primarily on the online programs of the ELP, but I also assist with various other programs, such as the business programs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining, Danielle. And so today, what are we going to talk about? Well, we just wanted to start with a quick introduction to the University of Pennsylvania, more specifically to the English language programs and the global workplace programs, which is what we're talking about today. And the lesson that you'll experience today is coming from those programs as well. And then we'll get into our sample lesson about negotiation across cultures, really thinking about intercultural interaction and intercultural negotiations. And we'll conclude with time for questions and answers. However, if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to put it in the chat, or also you're welcome to use the Q&A feature as well. So let's get started. The University of Pennsylvania is a really special university. I love working there and love getting to work with lots of different students in programs on campus as well as programs online. But since we're excited that you may be coming to study with us at the university, we wanted to tell you a little bit more about the university itself and our campus. So the University of Pennsylvania is ranked the 6th best university according to the U.S. News and World Report from last year, 2024, and that's in the United States. And then according to the QS World University Rankings from this year, 2025, University of Pennsylvania, or Penn, as we call it for short, was ranked the 11th best university according to these world university rankings. So we're quite proud that our university is seen as really a highly prestigious university, both within the US and worldwide. So if you're not familiar with the University of Pennsylvania, you might be wondering, where is that? And where is that located in the United States? So we are located, as the name kind of would make you suggest, in the state of Pennsylvania in the United States. And we're located in the city of Philadelphia. So you can see right here, this star is showing you we're on the southeast corner of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. We are very close to New York City. Also, Washington, D.C. is quite close as well. So it's a really wonderful location because if you're interested in doing a little bit of traveling, when you come to study with us, you can get to New York in about an hour, a little over an hour on the train, maybe just an hour on the train, actually. And DC is about an hour and a half on the train, a little longer if you drive because of traffic. But you can also go to the beach if you come to study with us in June. We have a beach about an hour away as well. So we're in a really nice location in the United States to be able to do some explorations as well. And Philadelphia, as I said, is where the university is located. It's a mid-sized city in the United States. But it has really wonderful culture, museums, history. A lot of the United States history and the founding of the United States was situated in the United States. So if you're interested in seeing historical sites, it's a wonderful place to be. We have wonderful museums, music, sporting events, restaurants. And within our programs, we get you out into the city and engaged in some of these wonderful opportunities through social and cultural events. And then even though we are in the city, we always like to tell students that the campus is really quite a refuge from the city. It's very green, as you can see in this picture. We have tons of trees on campus, green spaces. There's ponds, fields, for sports if you like to, maybe play soccer or tennis. So even though we're in the city, we also have the advantage of having lots of nice green space, and the campus feels like a campus, not just some buildings throughout a city. So now I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, who will tell us a little bit more about the English language programs, more specifically, and then the global workplace programs for professionals.
All right, thank you. So here at English Language Programs, we do have a variety of programs available in addition to the business programs that we're going to discuss today. First of all, we do have an intensive program which is accredited, and this allows students to develop their language skills in many different ways. It can be with some extra preparation in business or academics, but really addressing all aspects of language development. So those programs run for 8 weeks, and we have people who do multiple programs one after the other. But that's one option on our campus. We also offer university preparation programs, and these are for people who are interested in pursuing higher education in the United States. It helps them to learn about the university application process, whether it be for undergraduate or graduate, to prepare for actual participation in the academic life. So this is another popular program at our Language Institute. We do a number of short programs, and some of these are open enrollment, meaning anyone can sign up. Some of them are custom programs. We have a lot of experience creating programs for specific businesses to meet their needs, or organizations. So there's really a wide range of what can be done in a short program to address specific needs of particular groups. We have professional English programs, which are related to some of the short programs. So the program we're discussing today is one of these. And in this case, it's an in-person program, but we also have partnered with Santander Open Academies to create some professional English training that is available free and online and asynchronous. So I will be sure to share some of that information in the chat feature shortly. So, why would you choose to come study with us? Well, in addition to all these great programs that you have to choose from, we also have really expert teaching faculty with many years of experience in programs like this one, and really just a variety of programs. There is great flexibility and expertise among our teaching faculty. We also, as Sarah mentioned, have a number of social and cultural activities that we encourage within our institute, within the University of Pennsylvania, and even out within the community of Philadelphia itself. We have people on staff who can provide individual advising and support. Instructors provide that support as well. So there are a number of resources available to people who choose to come study with us. Today, we will be discussing our global workplace programs, and the sample lesson will be from this type of program. So there are two programs within this category, the first being professional communication, and the second, interpersonal and intercultural interactions. For these programs, as I mentioned, they are separate programs. They are each 2 weeks in length, but if you are interested in both, they are scheduled so that you could take one and then take the other. The topics are different enough to really provide, a breadth of understanding of what it means to communicate effectively in the professional environment. So each program has about 15 weeks of academic instruction and participation. So that is per week, and again, 2 weeks. And really the focus of study generally for both programs is communication skills for the global workplace. I'll share with you a bit about some of the differences between them, but really the overall aim for both is to communicate more effectively in a global workplace. As Sarah mentioned earlier, we have quite a lot of social activities and cultural activities available to us. So for part of this program, there will be opportunities to participate in speaker series, visit museums, sports, networking, and beyond what is available in the city, these will be items that are worked into the program itself. So the group will be attending as a group to have those experiences and, of course, to practice the English skills that you would be working on in the classroom. In terms of who this would be most appropriate for, it would really be best for someone at the intermediate to advanced stage of English language development. And if you have any questions about that at the end, we can talk about what that means and provide some resources to help you understand if that would apply to you or not. But that would be the best situation. So these programs, while they do have some differences, they have very common goals in that you are working towards professional communication in the global workplace. And in both cases, you will be doing that through interactive workshops. So this is not a passive experience. It will be active. You will be interacting with the instructors, with each other, with other people within the university community. And this will happen in the classroom in workshops, case studies, some role-playing exercises to really practice those experiences of using language in the global workplace. The goals being improving interpersonal communication, also resolving conflicts diplomatically. So what language, what skills can we develop to meet that need that is common throughout global workplaces? Also, you will be discussing and practicing how to convey professionalism in a varied workplace. So considering what that means in different contexts or to different people. And you'll also be working on your ability to engage with others, whether that be a colleague or a client, a supervisor, someone that you are working with to meet a common goal. And then as the programs come to an end, participants who complete the program will receive a certificate, the typical standard paper certificate, but also a digital credential that is easily shared through various social media platforms. So that is what will come as a result. So as I mentioned, today we'll be talking about the two programs, but we're going to focus specifically on one of those being interpersonal and intercultural interactions. So this is the program that will be offered June 16th through 27th. And the topics in this program are related to the interpersonal skills, meaning relationship building, generally speaking. So what kind of language, what kind of interactions can we have to build positive relationships with colleagues and clients? Taking into account that when you have a audience or in situation where there are many cultures represented, the language, the strategies might need to be adapted. So that's part of what will be discussed and worked on in this course, in this program. This program also delves into emotional intelligence, so understanding yourself, your emotions, the emotions of others, how do those contribute to or hinder professional interactions? Another area that is really important in this program is conflict resolution and negotiation. So this is where the lesson from today comes. And really looking at conflict is inherent in any sort of, group interaction. How can we deal with that in a positive way and respond in a way that is constructive to our goals, for our projects, and also to our relationships with our colleagues and clients? This will also involve negotiation skills, so negotiation tactics, language that's used in negotiation, body language that's used in negotiation. And finally, as part of this program, there will be quite a bit about workplace adaptability, professionalism. How is the global workplace changing, and how can we adapt to it in a positive way? How can we maintain professionalism? What does that mean in today's different environment? And how can we be culturally sensitive and deal with feedback in a way that's professional and positive? So this is the course that we'll sort of be focusing on today, specifically the conflict resolution portion. All
Uh,
right.
all right. Thank you so much, Danielle.
You're welcome.
So let's get into it. Today, we're going to be providing a quick sample lesson. This is a lesson that comes from the program that Danielle just outlined so thoughtfully and clearly. And this lesson we thought that might be interesting to you is focused on negotiating across cultures. So we'll be talking all about intercultural negotiations in the next 25 minutes or 25 to 30 minutes or so. And so just to give you an overview, in this lesson, what we'll be focusing on is thinking about how culture really impacts professional negotiations. And more specifically, we'll look at how intercultural conflict might impact negotiations, the concept of face and how this idea of face impacts intercultural negotiations in a global workplace. And then finally, we'll conclude with some strategies that are going to be helpful in thinking about how you can engage more successfully in intercultural negotiations. Okay, so before we actually get started and sharing some of this information, I wanted you to take a few moments to think about these questions. And if you feel comfortable, share your answers in the chat. So, what do you think? What do we mean by intercultural conflict? How do you understand this term, intercultural conflict? What is it? And have you ever experienced this in the workplace? Have you ever found yourself in a conflict that you think is related to cultural misunderstanding, perhaps? And then also, based on your experience, what are some ways in which culture might impact negotiations? So I'll give you a moment to think about these two questions. As I said, if you feel comfortable, please do put your answers in the chat. But if not, you can just kind of think on that and we'll discuss in a moment. Danielle, as we're letting people think about and maybe type up their answers, I wonder if you have, an answer to either of these questions, maybe if you'd be comfortable sharing any sorts of intercultural conflict you might have experienced or some thoughts about how culture impacts negotiations.
Sure. I guess if I'm thinking about sort of how we would even define intercultural conflict, I'm thinking about maybe less about conflict and more about a breakdown. So I walk into a situation and I have certain expectations, right? And those expectations were built, through my experience being raised primarily in an American environment. So I think that conflict interculturally comes about when different people have different expectations, and maybe they're not even aware, or maybe they can't even articulate what those expectations are, but certainly they know when others are acting in a way that, doesn't meet those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see Alfredo in the chat put an answer here. Culturally, we all see conflict resolution differently. Absolutely, I agree. Even within a same country, what is deemed appropriate may vary. Yes. So just because Danielle and I are both American, we may have had different experiences and have different expectations, as she just kind of laid out. I've worked in multinational companies, and understanding what a culture considers appropriate definitely helps resolve and talk. Being aware helps you make your points. Yeah, absolutely. I think those are really great points, Alfredo. Yeah. So, really, this awareness is something that throughout the program, we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on and kind of. I think one really great element of the program is that likely we'll have participants from different cultures. So there should be kind of a wealth of intercultural knowledge and experience inside the classroom. So you can ask, your classmates maybe from Japan, or if you have a classmate from Europe or South America, what their experiences are might be quite different than your experiences or cultural expectations.
And Sarah, if I could share an example, I was working with a pharmaceutical company providing some English language training and support for some of their senior managers. And part of the reason I was chosen was because human resources had a senior manager that was not performing in the way they expected. And it was interesting when I spoke with the senior manager, um, he said that he was very frustrated because his ideas were not being listened to when HR was saying that he was not offering ideas. And through the interaction with both sides, what I learned was that the breakdown was coming about in how ideas were framed with language. So the senior manager was from a culture where there would be less direct suggestions, or less direct language, I should say, used to offer a suggestion, whereas the HR manager was expecting more direct, such as, in my opinion, or I think. So really, we had to work and discuss, okay, um, what adjustments could we make to language that would find a middle ground between the two and help the senior manager be successful. Ultimately, he was, because once he understood that it was about changing the wording, he felt more comfortable offering suggestions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danielle. That's a great example. Alfredo also put in another comment here about choosing words and, translating the language, and then maybe your message gets distorted. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about in that example, right? The employee thought that they were delivering one message, but the message that was being received was something different, right? So this happens all the time. And yeah, welcome, Guillermo. Very nice to have you here as well. Okay, thank you. So let's keep going. I want to share a definition of intercultural conflict, just so we all are kind of thinking about this in the same way. But Danielle explained it very well, and Alfredo also brought up some of these ideas. But when we're thinking about intercultural conflict, we're thinking about this experience of, communication breakdown, as Danielle put it, or emotional frustration that's happening when there are perceptions of incompatibility, so kind of differences of values, norms, face orientations, goals, scarce resources, processes, and or outcomes. And this is happening in communication between at least two parties from two different cultural communities. But it could be more, right? You might have a situation where you have, 3 or 5 parties and different cultural backgrounds involved in the same communication or interaction or negotiation. So if you come and study with us in this program, we'll talk about a lot of these, about the values, norms, goals, scarce resources, processes. But today, I wanted to start by thinking a little bit more about this idea of face orientations. So to start with, what do you think? What is face? And you'll see here that I put it in quotation marks. So I don't mean face like the front of your head. I mean something more specific to intercultural interaction, negotiations. So any ideas, and you feel free to put it in the chat. What might I mean by face? And a hint might be, you might have heard this expression, losing face. Someone is afraid that they will lose face in an interaction or by doing something. No idea. Perfect. Well, I'm glad, because it will be new information. All right. Well, I won't keep you in suspense. So this idea of face in this way means a person's reputation and feelings of prestige within multiple social contexts. So it really means like your self-image, how you are portraying yourself and how other people see you. So if I say, I don't want to lose face, it may mean that I don't want people to perceive me, my public image or reputation, to be damaged or hurt. Maybe I'm afraid that if in a negotiation I am not strong enough, people will see me as being weak and I will lose some face. Or maybe if I'm teaching and a student asks me a question and I don't know the answer, I might be afraid that my expertise is challenged and I lose face. I lose some of that kind of reputation of my self-image. So why is this important to think about in terms of intercultural negotiations? Well, it's because a lot of this idea of face is very culturally specific, and some cultures have more emphasis on this idea of face orientation. So there's a theory, face negotiation theory, that can be helpful when we're thinking about how we negotiate interculturally and how we understand what's happening when we're having an intercultural communication. And in order to help us understand this, there's these 3 different types of face. So the first is self-face, and that's the one that I kind of mentioned in thinking about, maybe losing face if I don't know the answer to a question, or if I appear weak in a negotiation with a client or a colleague, right? So it's my concern about how my own self-image or reputation is perceived by others. But there are also other types here. The next is other face, and this is when we are concerned about another person's reputation or self-image, their face, right? So if I'm in a negotiation and I'm maybe I'm from a culture where there are real hierarchies in terms of power and positions. And I can't maybe challenge someone who's in a higher position than me. right? Because if I were to do that, that would cause the other person to lose face or for their reputation and position to be challenged. So I have to be kind of aware of that if I'm interacting with someone from a culture that has that type of hierarchical power structure. And then the third one, which I think is really very interesting and important when we're thinking about these kinds of intercultural interactions, is this idea of mutual faith. And this really has to do with a concern for everybody involved in the interaction. And more than that, thinking about everyone's self-image and reputation, but also the kind of reputation and self-image and health of the relationship that you have maybe with a client or with a colleague that you're negotiating with. All right, so I gave some examples, and maybe Danielle has an example for us too. But what do you think? How might the concept of face vary across cultures and impact negotiations? Danielle, do you have any ideas on this? And I think on the next page, I'll just put here, as you're kind of thinking more generally, can you think of an example where you've noticed a cultural difference in the concept of face?
Sure. So I can share something as our participants are typing in the chat. Give them a little time to formulate their thoughts and get those written out. So I had a situation, my professional context, like Sarah's, is the university classroom. And I had a teacher who was visiting from a country that has much more hierarchy related to age and experience within a company. And she was assigned to come to my classroom and just sit in and listen. Now, I had students in that classroom, but she was also there, and she participated in the activities as if she were a student. However, she was much older than I was at the time, and she had much more experience than I did. And yet, in some ways, I had to treat her as a student in the class. And I knew this was uncomfortable for her based on her body language and her interactions with me outside of the classroom. It was not going well. So, what I did one day was I was giving papers back to the rest of the students. And it was a very small thing, but I knew that in her culture, to pass something to someone, you use two hands to show that person respect. So I was very careful that when I handed her things, and in this case, a paper like I was giving to the rest, I placed them down and I picked up hers and I handed it with two hands to her. And her body language changed very visibly after that moment. And by trying to put other opportunities in the classroom to sort of refer to her as the expert, I was able to create a much more comfortable environment where the students' needs were still met, my needs as an instructor were being met, and hers as an expert observer were also being met. So that was, I think, a positive experience overall, but all of our face was maintained in that situation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danielle. That's a really great example. And I think, as you talked through that example, we did see this idea of, maybe less about self-face, but your concern about other face and then this mutual face as well. And I see Alfredo just put a message in the chat. So I'm going to read that one. Some cultures are more male oriented, such as Southern Europe and Latin America, while others have more kind of equality between males and females, such as the Nordic countries. Alfredo says he witnessed a discussion between a high-ranking Swedish female manager with a male country manager from Latin America. Wow, interesting. There was definitely a face struggle. The man had to win, according to the Latin American manager. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, so there's all kinds of these cultural differences, right? Maybe definitely some cultures are more patriarchal, where the males have to culturally, it's more appropriate for males to kind of dominate and have this more powerful stance, as you mentioned here. So this dynamic where that's not the case, maybe for this Swedish manager, it's there's a clash there, right? There's a real conflict with different expectations of what is okay. And then how do you negotiate so that both, there's this mutual face, that everybody's face is maintained when you have these real conflicts. And it can be quite challenging. Yeah, excellent examples there. So as we talked about, misunderstanding your counterpart or having these situations where someone's face is challenged and they feel that they are maybe being disrespected, or they feel that they're losing some of their authority, can really have negative consequences. You may harm a relationship with a client, or you may even have a situation where the negotiation breaks down entirely. That could have really tremendous consequences for you as a professional. So in addition to face, we also want to be thinking about how culture impacts the way that we read. And again, I put read in quotes because I don't mean actually reading on a piece of paper, a text, or on your computer screen, but I mean how we interpret both the verbal language that we've talked about a bit, but also nonverbal cues. So what do you think? What do I mean by nonverbal cues? How do you usually communicate at work without words? What kinds of things do you use that are nonverbal means of communication? And if you have any ideas, feel free to put it in the chat. Danielle, as we're letting the participants type, do you have a type of, oh, we have already, Alfredo's fast. Hand gestures, face expressions. Yes, even how close you get to a workmate. Alfredo, perfect. You could have created this slide right here, but yes, absolutely. So we want to think about all of these. So we have here hand gestures. Hand gestures can be really culturally specific. What a gesture might mean here in Philadelphia could mean something quite different in your culture. So you should be, doing some research on, what hand gestures might mean if you're dealing with other professionals from specific cultures. That can be really helpful to kind of have a sense of, okay, well, what do these gestures mean when they're using, and making sure that you're not using gestures that could be a cause of conflict or misunderstanding. How close you get to your workmate. So we have here posture and position. So how close, how much physical space do you leave when you're talking to someone? In some cultures, it's appropriate and respectful to get quite close to the person you're talking to, while in others, the expectation is that you give a bit of distance or personal space. And then how are you, how are you sitting or standing? Are you kind of upright and demonstrating a posture of kind of power or authority? Or are you a little bit more closed, or giving a posture that maybe is communicating something else to the person you're speaking with, maybe less confidence, for example? Facial expressions, another one here. So, are you smiling a lot? Are you, is your face always quite serious so that the person that you are talking to is not quite able to read what that facial expression may mean? Or maybe you're using a serious face because in your culture, that's showing respect, but the person that you're communicating with may interpret that kind of serious or kind of firm facial expression as you being maybe angry, perhaps. So thinking about what that facial expression might mean, and cultural expectations of facial expressions and how that might differ across cultures. And we're going to get into that a bit with thinking about emotional expressiveness in just a moment. Also, eye contact. This is a big one and can be very, very different across different cultures. You know, in the US, the norm is that you give someone eye contact when you're talking to them because it shows in the US that you're listening to them and that you're engaged and that you're serious and you're showing respect to that person. But in some cultures, actually, it's disrespectful to look, you know, directly at someone who has a higher level of authority or power stance than you. So this is another really important factor to consider in terms of nonverbal communication. And then the last one I have here is sound of voice. So even though, you know, voice is, we use our voice for our verbal communication, the way that we use our voice is sometimes not quite thought about. So by sound of voice, I mean maybe your volume. You know, in some cultures to show in the United States in particular, you know, I think it's important to speak loudly enough and that if you don't have a high enough volume, right, if you're real quiet, or you're speaking really quietly, people may think that you're you know, not an expert, that you don't have authority. So in order to display authority and expertise, we tend to speak loudly, right? And to kind of hold the floor in a conversation. It can also have to do with the tone of your voice. Does your tone maybe convey to the person that you're talking to something that you don't want it to? Does the person think that maybe you're angry or upset by your tone? Or maybe they think that you're joking by the tone that you're using and you're not. Or even that you're saying something and you mean it to be a statement, but your tone makes it sound like a question to the person that you're speaking to. So these are all types of nonverbal communication that can be really important to consider. And in the program, there'll be lots of opportunities, like Danielle mentioned, to kind of work together in small groups, to role play, so that you'll have practice engaging in kinds of mock negotiations, mock interactions, professional encounters to practice these. Okay, and the last thing I want to conclude with in this lesson is to give some strategies for successful intercultural negotiations. We've kind of talked about, I hope you now see why it's important to consider culture when we're thinking about professional negotiations. But now, you know, what strategies can we use to improve negotiations when we're in an intercultural global workplace? So one thing we really want to think about is how we express disagreement. So disagreement can definitely lead to conflict, right? It's conversations tend to go quite well in negotiations when everybody agrees on everything. But we know that's not always the case, right? Often there's going to be disagreement, and you're going to need to express that disagreement to the people that you're negotiating with. So when we're thinking about how we express that disagreement, we have some verbal considerations. So in some cultures, it's appropriate to be very direct. If you think back to Danielle's example, you know, this person thought that they were giving feedback, but it was so indirect that the person they were delivering the feedback to didn't even recognize that it was feedback. So we need to think about, you know, how direct we are being in our feedback and what the other person is, their expectation of directness. On the other hand, if you're too direct, it can be seen as impolite. So this is something that, you know, is important to consider. You don't want to offend someone. So we need to think about politeness norms in terms of the language that we're choosing. Well, also another thing to think about is hedges and boosters. So hedges are language we can use to soften our language. So something like, oh, well, maybe I say to Danielle, thank you for this report, but you might want to consider adding a little bit more detail to this section instead of just kind of saying, add more detail to this section. I can make it a bit softer with some hedging. Also maybe being a little bit more indirect in my language choices. And then boosters are a way to kind of strengthen. So things like, the level of detail that you included in this last section is extremely helpful, right? I might tell Danielle, and if you could add more detail to this first section so that it looks more aligned with that one. So thinking about how we're using these types of language. And then also finally thinking about what people aren't talking about, this avoidance idea. Sometimes maybe in a format in order to save face, it's better not to express your full disagreement and maybe do it in a different format, right? Maybe in a one-on-one meeting or in an email communication. And then we also have nonverbal signals. So we know that when people are disagreeing with what someone else is saying or what someone else is proposing, often they'll avert their gaze. That means that they'll look away. They might not give eye contact. They may nod, which in the US, nodding up and down like this usually means yes, but sometimes we use it to mean, that we aren't agreeing with something, which can be confusing as well. And then, when people are disagreeing with something, sometimes they feel uncomfortable, and that discomfort can actually lead to smiling or laughing. So again, thinking very carefully about how you disagree and express your disagreement in a way that the person you're interacting with feels comfortable with that disagreement and is understanding your message of disagreement. The next strategy is thinking about the appropriate level of emotional expressiveness. This is the one I mentioned a bit before, and I want to share this figure with you here. So there's been a lot of research about cultural differences in emotional expressiveness. So some cultures in and this is specific to professional settings. So some cultures in professional settings will be quite emotionally expressive and, may display frustration and anger and excitement in big ways. Whereas other cultures, it would be inappropriate to display those types of emotion in a professional setting. And instead, even if they're feeling quite an extreme emotion like anger or frustration or joy, happiness, excitement, they'll stay very kind of what we call stoic or serious, right? And professional and not show any of that emotion. And then we also have these ideas of whether someone is confrontational, and that goes along with that directness that we were talking about. So we'll directly say, no, I don't agree, or this doesn't work for us, or they're going to avoid confrontation, not express directly when there's disagreement or a problem. So you can see here we have some countries. Does anyone see their country and have disagreement or agreement with where they're put here on this figure? So,
Or maybe
Go
Sarah,
ahead.
if they're not on the chart, where do they think their country would fall on the chart? That would also be
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, Alfredo says his parents are from Spain, and he agrees here with, I guess, emotionally expressive and somewhat confrontational. Costa Rican, on the other hand, are completely not confrontational. Interesting. So different. Wow. Yeah, so they have a hard time. Yes, it can really cause some intercultural conflict when there's these real differences here. For example, if you have, say, someone from Israel trying to communicate with someone from Japan, we have real differences in emotional expression and confrontation avoidance. So can really be important to kind of think about this and learn about how other cultures, what their norms are in terms of professional communication. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm going to go to the last two strategies. One, this third one here is thinking about cultural norms of building trust. So this is really important, and this is kind of goes along with that interpersonal element that we'll be talking about in the course. But really, different cultures have very different kinds of beliefs about professional and relational trust. So, in certain cultures, there's this expectation that before you can have this deep professional relationship and engage in serious professional interactions, you first have to have this emotional connection or a relationship established. Whereas other cultures really kind of separate the personal and the professional, and they have kind of a clear line between. So if people from these different, cultural expectations are trying to negotiate and come together, there can be a real disconnect there. So thinking about the cultural norms and having that inform the way that you're engaging with this colleague or this client can be really, really important to get to a successful end result of your negotiation. And then the last one is avoiding direct or closed-ended questions. So by closed-ended, we mean like a yes/no question. And the problem with that is that it can sometimes shut down the negotiation or stop the negotiation. So for example, if, for example, you're working with a client and you want to discuss their opinion maybe on a project so far, that how that project has been developing. And if the program manager, for example, asks the client, are you satisfied with the project so far? That's very closed. And maybe the client is not satisfied, but they avoid confrontation. So they don't want to say no, and they feel kind of stuck. And so they just kind of stop. So instead of asking a really closed question that maybe traps the person you're talking to, you should try to use a more open-ended question. So in this case, maybe we would ask something like, how do you feel about the progress on the project so far? How do you think this is going? What issues are you having? What challenges have you encountered? Is there anything we can do to help make this better for you? So really trying to use these open-ended questions. Okay, so we're almost at time. And one more, sorry. Look for nonverbal cues. Again, yeah, always thinking about these nonverbal cues to help us make sure we're correctly understanding the message the person we're talking to is trying to convey. So with that, I'm going to conclude our lesson portion, and I'm going to turn it back over to Danielle to just go over very quickly a little bit more about what learners will get from enrolling in the Global Workplace Program.
Thank you, Sarah. Right, so I don't want to take up too much time because I want you to have time for your questions, but I have put in the chat the link to the program website. So there you can see more details, but just sort of an overview of what do the two programs have in common. Really, both programs are meant to promote your ability to communicate clearly and effectively in a very diverse professional context. So to give you the skills and allow you the practice to really walk out feeling confident going into a multicultural workplace environment. They both address emotional intelligence, thinking about how to express our understanding, empathy, and how to really adapt to these multicultural environments. You will also be working on negotiation, resolving conflict, the language, and the strategies that are best practices for doing that so that you can reach those common goals. And both will be addressing the demonstration of professionalism. What does that look like in today's global and multicultural workplace environment? How can we address provide and respond to feedback very constructively and in a positive way. So these are some similarities about the two programs. Certainly, they each have specific goals that are unique to them. So if you were interested in both, certainly it would make sense to take both. Um, if you would like a breakdown of these specific topics, by all means, go to the website I put in the chat, and there you can see the specific topics for each program. If you scroll to the bottom, you can also see the schedule for each program to kind of give you a sense of what would the day be like if you were participating. Do you have any questions? Please feel free, put them in the chat. We're happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. And thanks. I
Sure.
saw a lot of questions coming in the
Mhm.
chat, and Danielle's answered a bunch of them. But yes, please, if you have any other additional questions, we're here to answer any questions you might have.
And if you have questions, after the fact when we're finished, please keep our email handy. We're happy to answer those. elp@sas.upenn with two N's .edu. You can always reach out to us that way.